"You got enough there, honey? Maybe I can get you a piggy bank for the rest." She said it loud. Loud enough for the table beside him to hear, loud enough for the couple near the window to turn. Loud enough for the young man bussing tables 3 feet away to stop moving entirely, his hands frozen around a stack of plates he suddenly didn't know what to do with. The man at the corner booth did not look up right away. He was counting. Quarters, dimes, a few nickels arranged in small stacks on the paper placemat, the kind of careful counting that takes concentration. He was dressed plainly. A gray Henley, dark trousers, clean work boots, and he had ordered coffee and the Tuesday special, which came to $11.40. He had the money. He had always had the money, but the coins were there, and the waitress had seen them, and something in her had decided that was all she needed to know about him. Her name tag read Brandy. She was leaning against the service counter now, one hip cocked, arms folded, wearing a small smile she shared with the other waitress behind the pass-through window. A performance. The dining room of Cornerstone Kitchen on Delmar Boulevard was not large, 14 tables, maybe 40 covers at capacity, and on a Tuesday afternoon it was half full, and every person in it had just heard what she said. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. The man at the corner booth looked up. He looked at Brandy with eyes that were calm and level and gave nothing away. He set the last quarter on its stack. He said, "Just the check, please." 5 words. That was all. Brandy laughed, a short dismissive sound, and turned back to the pass-through. Freeze right there. What she didn't know in that moment was who she had just mocked. She didn't know what those coins represented, or what the man counting them had built, or what his name meant on a set of documents locked in a filing cabinet on the 4th floor of a building 12 blocks away. She didn't know that the restaurant she was standing in, the uniform she was wearing, the paycheck that would hit her account on Friday, all of it traced back to him. When the truth came out, it cost her everything. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you who he really was, and how a man who moved in silence for 20 years ended up sitting in a corner booth counting coins while the world made its assumptions. His name was Calvin Reese. He was 51 years old, and he had grown up in a 2-bedroom house on the north side of St. Louis where the kitchen smelled permanently of his grandmother's cornbread and the iron and dust warmth of a radiator that never quite worked right in winter. His grandmother, Estelle Reese, had run a small catering operation out of that kitchen for 30 years. Church suppers, repast meals, graduation parties. And Calvin had been her shadow from the time he was old enough to carry a pot. He learned to cook before he learned long division. He learned the cost of ingredients before he understood interest rates. And he learned from Estelle the maxim she repeated so often it became the rhythm of his childhood. "Stay low," she would say, pressing a dish towel into his hands. "Build high. Let the work speak when you're ready, not before." He had carried those 6 words the way some men carry a photograph. Close, private, worn smooth at the edges from handling. Calvin had not gone to a prestigious university. He had gone to a state school on a partial scholarship, studied business administration at night while working days at a hotel kitchen in Clayton, and graduated without ceremony in the spring of 1997. No connections, no family money, no mentor in a corner office who made a call. What he had was Estelle's discipline, a spiral notebook where he kept every cost calculation he had ever made, and a clarity about what he wanted that most people his age could not yet name. He wanted to own something real, something that fed people, something that lasted. His first restaurant was not a restaurant, it was a lunch counter, 8 stools, a griddle, a reach-in cooler, in a rented storefront on Natural Bridge Avenue. He opened it in 2001 with $42,000, most of it borrowed from a credit union that almost didn't approve the loan. He called it Cornerstone. He worked the counter himself 6 days a week, did the books on Sunday, and paid every supplier on time every single time, because Estelle had taught him that a man's word was his operating capital, and once you spent it, it was gone. He did not talk about what he was building. He simply built it. By 2005, he had opened a second location. By 2009, a third. He reinvested everything, took no salary beyond what he needed to live on, and made decisions the way a man makes decisions when he knows one wrong turn costs him everything. Careful, methodical, quiet. The kind of growth that generates no press releases, because Calvin had no interest in being known. He had interest in being solvent, in being real, in building something that would outlast him. By the time he sat down in the corner booth that Tuesday afternoon in October, Cornerstone Kitchen had 14 locations across the St. Louis metropolitan area. It employed 412 people. Its revenues would have surprised anyone who looked at the man in the gray Henley and saw only what they expected to see. Nobody knew. That was how Calvin had built it. That was how he preferred it. He visited his locations regularly, unannounced, always alone, always ordering from the regular menu and paying like any other customer. He sat, he watched, he listened to how staff talked to each other and to the people who came through the door. He looked at the condition of the tables, the speed of the service, the food coming out of the kitchen. He did not carry a clipboard. He did not wear a badge. He carried a small leather notebook, the same kind he had carried since 1997, and made quiet notes in handwriting so small it was nearly illegible to anyone but him. The coins were part of it. He had done it since the lunch counter days, paid in cash, often in change, because it kept him honest about what a meal actually cost a working person. Estelle had taught him that too. "Never forget what $11 means to somebody," she had said once, standing over the griddle at 6 a.m. "The day you forget, that is the day you stop understanding your customer." He had not forgotten. Now, here's what most people didn't know about the Delmar location. It was the original. The first cornerstone that had grown beyond the lunch counter on Natural Bridge. The first location Calvin had opened in a proper dining room with booths and a full kitchen and a staff of 8. He had chosen this building himself, negotiated the lease himself, designed the layout himself. The framed photograph near the entrance, a black and white image of a woman pressing dough at a kitchen counter, was Estelle. He had put it there in 2003, the year after she died, and it had stayed through 3 renovations and 2 changes of general manager. He had never told any of the staff who she was. He sat in the corner booth because it was the booth he had sat in the first time he ever ate in this room as a customer, before he signed the lease, before he put his name on anything. He had ordered coffee and the Tuesday special then too. He had sat and watched the room and tried to imagine what it could become. He had been 34 years old and terrified and absolutely certain. He was still certain. He had simply learned over 20 years to wear it more quietly. The woman who had made his afternoon difficult was named Brandy Colton. She had worked at the Delmar location for 2 years and 4 months. She was 29, had grown up in a suburb west of the city, and had come to waitressing after a brief and unsuccessful attempt at real estate. She was not a cruel person in the broad sense, but she had learned, somewhere along the way, to read a room by its surfaces, by what people wore, by whether they paid with a card or counted out coins, and to treat people accordingly. She had a hierarchy. It operated without her being fully conscious of it, the way most hierarchies do. A man in a suit got refills without asking. A woman with a designer bag got the good table by the window. A man in a gray Henley, counting quarters at the corner booth, got a joke about a piggy bank. She had never questioned this. Nobody at the Delmar location had ever asked her to. The general manager was a man named Derek Paulson. He was 43, had been in restaurant management for 15 years, and had been running this location for 3. He was competent, organized, and deeply committed to not making waves. He had heard Brandy's comment from his office doorway. The door was open, as it usually was on Tuesday afternoons. And he had felt something tighten in his chest. He had looked out at the dining room, at the man in the corner booth, at the small stacks of coins on the placemat, and he had made a calculation. The restaurant was half full. Nobody was complaining. The man at the corner booth had not reacted. Derek Paulson had gone back to his desk. He would think about that decision for a long time afterward. There was one person in the dining room who did not make that calculation. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 23 years old, had been bussing tables at the Delmar location for 7 months, and had been standing 3 feet away with a stack of plates when Brandy made her comment. He had heard it. He had seen the man at the corner booth look up, and he had seen something in that look. Not anger, not embarrassment, but something older and more composed than either, that he could not name but could not dismiss. Marcus set down his plates. He walked to the corner booth, picked up the coffee carafe from the station near the wall, and refilled the man's cup without being asked. He said, quietly, "I'm sorry about that, sir." The man at the corner booth looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once and said, "Thank you." 4 words between them. That was all. But Marcus Webb had just done something that would matter more than he knew. He had seen a man being diminished in public and had chosen, at some cost to his own standing in that room, to do the small, decent thing. He had not confronted Brandy or called for a manager or made a scene. He had simply refilled a cup and offered 2 words of acknowledgement. Sometimes that is enough to change the shape of what comes next. Brandy, watching from the service counter, made a face at the other waitress. She said something low that Marcus couldn't fully hear, but the tone was clear. She thought he was being ridiculous. She turned back to her other tables and did not think about the moment again. She should have thought about it, because Calvin Reese was still sitting in the corner booth, and he had not opened his leather notebook yet, and the afternoon was not over. And it was about to get considerably worse. Branda Colton did not let the moment rest. That was the thing about her particular brand of certainty. It had no mechanism for doubt, no internal voice that said, "Perhaps I have misread this situation." It only knew how to press forward, to double down, to perform for whatever audience was available. The couple near the window had gone back to their meal. The table beside Calvin had paid and left. The dining room had settled into its ordinary Tuesday afternoon rhythm. The low clatter of silverware, the smell of white bean and ham soup drifting from the kitchen passed through. Calvin had drunk half his refilled coffee and was writing in his small leather notebook, slowly, not looking up. Brandy came back to the corner booth. She had not been summoned. She came because she had decided, somewhere in the logic of her own hierarchy, that the man at the corner booth needed to be managed. She set the check down on the table with a small, deliberate slap. "Whenever you're ready," she said, and then, as she turned to go, she added, loud enough again for the room to hear, "No rush. We got all day for you to count it out." The young woman at the two-top near the service station looked up from her phone. The cook, who had come out to refill the condiment rack near the door, stopped moving. Marcus Webb, wiping down a table near the back, went still. Calvin Reese did not look up. He finished the sentence he was writing. He capped his pen. He set it down on the notebook parallel to the edge of the table, the way a man sets down a tool he is finished with for now but will need again. Then he looked at the check. He did not reach for the coins. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, folded neatly on the seat beside him, and produced a slim leather card holder. He set 2 bills on the table. He did not ask for change. He did not make a show of it. He simply closed the card holder, returned it to his jacket, picked up his notebook, and stood. He was not a tall man, but standing, he had a quality of stillness that occupied the room differently than sitting had. He buttoned the top button of his jacket. He looked at Brandy Colton with the same level, unhurried gaze he had given her the first time. He said, "I'll need to speak with the manager before I leave." 7 words, even in tone. No edge, no heat, no performance. Brandy blinked. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite recognition, not quite alarm, but a small involuntary recalibration, the kind the body makes before the mind catches up. She recovered quickly. "Sure," she said, with the lightness of a person who believes the manager will take her side. "I'll get Derek." She went to get Derek Paulson. Marcus Webb had not moved from the table he was pretending to wipe down. He was watching the corner booth with the careful attention of a person who has learned that the moments that look small are often the ones that turn out to matter. He did not know what was about to happen. But he had seen the way the man at the corner booth had reached into his jacket. He had seen the leather notebook. He had seen the quality of stillness. He knew, without being able to say exactly how, that something was about to change in this room. Derek Paulson came out of his office with the practiced expression of a manager who expects to mediate a minor complaint and send a customer away with an apology and a coupon. He was straightening his collar as he walked. He crossed the dining room and stopped at the corner booth, and Calvin Reese reached into the inside pocket of his jacket a second time. What Calvin Reese pulled from that pocket was not a complaint form. It was not a business card. It was not anything Derek Paulson's professional smile had been trained to handle. It was a folded document, several pages held together with a single binder clip, the edges worn soft from being carried in that pocket for exactly this kind of afternoon. Calvin unfolded it with the same unhurried economy he applied to everything. No theater, no announcement, and set it flat on the table between himself and Derek Paulson. Derek looked down. He stopped straightening his collar. The document was a corporate organizational chart. Clean, precise, printed on cornerstone kitchen letterhead. At the top, in a box that sat above every other box on the page, was a name. Calvin Reese. Below his name, founder and principal owner, Cornerstone Kitchen, LLC, 14 locations, St. Louis metropolitan area. Derek read it once, then he read it again. The dining room had gone quiet in the particular way dining rooms go quiet when something is happening that everyone can sense but no one yet understands. The young woman at the two-top had put her phone face down on the table. The cook near the condiment rack had not moved in 2 full minutes. Marcus Webb was standing at the back of the room with a folded cloth in his hand, not pretending to wipe anything anymore, just watching, breathing. Derek Paulson looked up from the document. He looked at the man in the gray Henley and the clean work boots who was watching him with calm, level eyes. He looked at the small stacks of coins still arranged on the paper placemat. He looked at the leather notebook. He looked back at the document. He said, "Mr. Reese?" And then he stopped because there was nothing after that he knew how to say. Calvin said, "I'd like to finish my coffee." 6 words. He sat back down. Derek Paulson stood at the edge of the corner booth for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then he turned and walked back across the dining room toward the service counter, where Brandy Colton was leaning with her arms folded, already composing the expression of a woman who expects to be told she was right. She was not told she was right. Derek stopped in front of her and said in a voice pitched low enough not to carry, "I need you to go to the back." His face had gone the color of old putty. "Right now, Brandy, go to the back and wait." Brandy looked past him toward the corner booth. She looked at the man sitting there, at the document still open on the table, at the expression on Derek's face. Something moved through her then, not understanding, not yet, but the first cold edge of it. "What's going on?" she said. Derek said, "Please." One word. The please was not a courtesy. It was the sound a man makes when he is trying to hold something together that is already coming apart. Brandy went to the back, and Calvin Reese sat in the corner booth and drank his coffee. He had not raised his voice. He had not made a scene. He had not done anything except sit and count and write in his notebook and ask to speak with the manager and produce, when the moment required it, the plain documentary evidence of who he was. He had done what Estelle had told him to do. He had let the work speak. He had simply waited until he was ready. The dining room breathed again, slowly, the way a room does when the pressure in it has shifted but not yet released. The young woman at the two-top picked up her phone. The cook went back to the condiment rack. But Marcus Webb did not move. He was watching the corner booth, and his face held something that was not quite relief and not quite awe, but lived somewhere between them. The expression of a person who has just seen something they did not know was possible and will not soon forget. He would not forget it. That much was already certain. What was less certain? In those quiet minutes while Calvin finished his coffee and Derek Paulson sat in his office with the door closed and the phone in his hand, was exactly how far the consequences of this Tuesday afternoon would travel. Brandy Colton, standing in the back near the dish station, arms still folded, had not yet grasped the full geography of what she had done. She understood in a vague and uncomfortable way that she had made an error. She did not yet understand the scale of it. She would, soon enough. Derek Paulson made 2 phone calls from his office. The first was to his direct supervisor, the regional operations manager for the North St. Louis corridor, a woman named Patricia Hale, who had been with Cornerstone Kitchen for 9 years and who answered on the second ring. Derek told her, in as few words as possible, what had happened. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. Then Patricia said, "Do not let him leave before I get there." She was 20 minutes away. The second call went to the corporate office on the 4th floor of the building, 12 blocks away. Derek dialed the general number and told the person who answered that Calvin Reese was at the Delmar location and that there had been an incident. The person on the other end went very quiet and then said, "I'll make sure the right people know." Derek Paulson sat at his desk and looked at the wall and thought about the decision he had made when he had heard Brandy's first comment from his office doorway and had gone back to his desk. He thought about it with the specific, nauseating clarity of a man who has just understood that a choice made in a fraction of a second is going to define a very long period of what comes next. He had seen it. He had heard it. He had calculated. And he had done nothing. That was the part that would stay with him, out in the dining room. Calvin Reese finished his coffee. He closed his notebook. He tucked the binder-clipped document back inside his jacket. He did not look toward the back of the house where Brandy was waiting. He did not look toward Derek's office. He looked for a moment at the framed photograph near the entrance, the black and white image of a woman pressing dough at a kitchen counter, her hands sure and unhurried, her face turned slightly away from the camera as if she had better things to attend to than being photographed. He looked at it the way a man looks at something that has been keeping him company for a long time. Then he looked across the room at Marcus Webb. Marcus had not moved from his spot near the back. He was still holding the folded cloth. He met Calvin's eyes and held them, unsure what the look meant, unsure what he was supposed to do with it. Calvin nodded. Once. The same nod he had given when Marcus refilled his cup. Deliberate, specific. The kind of nod that means I see you, and I will not forget. Marcus Webb felt the back of his throat tighten in a way he could not have explained to anyone. He nodded back. Patricia Hale arrived 17 minutes later, not 20. She was a compact woman in her early 50s, with close-cropped natural hair and the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been solving problems in restaurant operations since before some of her staff had been born. She had driven the whole way with her hands tight on the wheel and her jaw set, because she had worked for Calvin Reese for 9 years, and she knew, with the precision of long experience, exactly what it meant that he had been sitting in a corner booth at the Delmar location on a Tuesday afternoon counting coins. She knew what the visits were. She knew what the notebook was. She had never been present for one, and she had always been glad of that, because it meant things were running the way they were supposed to run. Today, things had not run the way they were supposed to run. She walked into the dining room, crossed directly to Calvin at the corner booth and said, "Mr. Reese, I am so sorry." Her voice was steady, but her hands, when she set them on the back of the booth, were not entirely. Calvin looked at her. He said, "Sit down, Patricia." She sat. He said, "Tell me about the staffing situation here. Not today, generally." She told him. They talked for 11 minutes quietly, while the dining room continued around them and the afternoon light moved long and amber through the front windows. When they were finished, Calvin stood. He buttoned his jacket. He said, "I'll need the personnel file for the server on this section today, and a full service audit for the last 6 months, customer interactions, complaint logs, anything written up and anything that wasn't." He paused. "Especially anything that wasn't." Patricia said, "I'll have it to you by end of week." He said, "By Thursday." He was already moving toward the door. He stopped at the entrance. He looked at the photograph of Estelle. He looked at it for exactly the length of time it took him to take one slow breath. Then he walked out into the October afternoon, and the door closed behind him with the soft, certain sound of a man who has said everything he needed to say and not one word more. He had said, in total, perhaps 30 words to Derek Paulson and Patricia Hale combined. 30 words. And the whole shape of what came next was already decided. Brandy Colton did not know that yet. She was still in the back of the house near the dish station, waiting for Derek to come tell her it was over, waiting for the version of events where she had been misunderstood, where the whole thing had been blown out of proportion, where the document had turned out to mean something other than what Derek's face had suggested. She was still waiting for that version. It was not coming. Derek appeared at the back of house door. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has already decided what he has to do and finds no comfort in the decision. He said, "I need you to come to my office." She followed him. She sat across from his desk. She watched him open a drawer and produce a form she recognized. She had seen it used once before for a cook caught taking product. Derek said, "What happened this afternoon was a serious violation of our conduct standards." He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed in the last 10 minutes, carefully and without inflection. "The customer you spoke to in that manner is Calvin Reese. He is the founder and principal owner of Cornerstone Kitchen. He owns this location. He owns this building. He owns your employment contract." Brandy Colton sat very still. Derek said, "I'm terminating your employment effective today." He slid the form across the desk. "I need your signature acknowledging receipt of this notice." The room smelled of the dish station and the residual warmth of the kitchen, and something underneath both of those things that Brandy could not name, which was the smell of a certainty collapsing. She had been certain when she made her first comment, certain when she made the second, certain right up until the moment Derek had told her to go to the back, and even then she had expected to be vindicated. She had never considered, not for a fraction of a second, that the man counting coins at the corner booth was the man who owned the booth, who owned the table, who owned the building the table was in, who owned every paycheck that had ever been deposited into her account on a Friday. She had looked at him and seen exactly what she expected to see. And what she expected to see had been so loud in her head that it drowned out everything else. The quality of his stillness, the worn leather of the notebook, the way he had looked at her the first time with eyes that gave nothing away because they did not need to. She picked up the pen. Her hand was not entirely steady. She signed the form. Derek said, "I'll need your apron." He said it quietly, without satisfaction, because he was not a man who took satisfaction in this kind of thing. He was a man who was thinking about his own signed form, which he suspected was coming. He was not wrong. Brandy untied her apron. She set it on the desk. She stood. She did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would not make it worse. She walked out through the back-of-house door and out the side exit, into the alley, where the afternoon light was thin and the air smelled of kitchen exhaust, and the particular cold that comes in October when the sun is still up but has already given up on warmth. She stood in the alley for a moment. Then she walked to her car. The door of Cornerstone Kitchen closed behind her with the same soft, certain sound it made behind everyone who left. The difference was that she would not be coming back. The reckoning did not arrive like a storm. It arrived the way Calvin Reese had always operated, quietly, methodically, and with the full weight of 20 years behind it. Patricia Hale spent the remainder of that Tuesday afternoon in Derek Paulson's office, not across the desk from him but beside it, which was a distinction that mattered. She was not there as a visitor. She was there as the person who outranked him, who had always outranked him and who had driven 17 minutes with her hands tight on the wheel because she understood what this visit would now require. She had a legal pad. She asked Derek to walk her through the afternoon in sequence, from Brandy's first comment to the moment Calvin Reese walked out the front door, and she wrote everything down in the careful, unhurried handwriting of a woman who knows that what is written becomes evidence. Derek told her everything. He did not minimize it, or not much, because he was smart enough to understand that the version of events Patricia wrote down today was the version that would travel, and that the only thing worse than what he had done was being caught shaping the account of it. He told her about the open office door. He told her about the sound of Brandy's first comment carrying across the dining room. He told her about the calculation he had made and the desk he had gone back to. Patricia wrote it all down. She did not look up from the legal pad when he got to that part. When Derek was finished, Patricia capped her pen and said, "The service audit Mr. Reese requested. I'll need access to your complaint logs going back 18 months, not 6. She paused. "And the incident reports, all of them, including the ones filed informally." Derek said, "Some of those were verbal." Patricia said, "Then we'll need the staff who received them to put them in writing. This week." She stood. "Derek, what happened today wasn't an isolated incident. Isolated incidents don't look like what I saw in that dining room. They don't produce a customer who sits that still." Derek understood. He understood in the way a man understands something he has suspected for a long time and has been carefully not looking at. Patricia left his office, and the legal pad went with her. The corporate office had been informed. By Wednesday morning, the right people had made their own calls, and by Wednesday afternoon, the situation at the Delmar location had a file number, a review designation, and a team of 3 people assigned to it, none of whom worked in restaurant operations. They worked in human resources and legal. Now, here's what most people did not know about the way Calvin Reese ran his company. He had written the conduct standards himself. Not the legal language, he had attorneys for that, but the underlying principles the legal language was built to protect. He had written them in 2004, after a customer at the Natural Bridge location had been treated dismissively by a counter worker, and Calvin had witnessed it, and the customer had left without saying anything, and Calvin had stood at the window and watched her walk to her car and felt something cold and certain settle in his chest. He had gone home that night and written 3 pages in his spiral notebook about what it meant to run a place where people came to eat, about what a person surrendered when they walked through a door and trusted that they would be treated with basic dignity, about what it cost a person, not in money but in something older and less replaceable, to be mocked in a public room. He had built those 3 pages into the conduct standards that every Cornerstone Kitchen employee signed on their first day. Brandy Colton had signed them. 2 years and 4 months ago, she had sat in Derek Paulson's office and read those standards and signed her name at the bottom, and the signature was on file in the personnel records Patricia Hale had requested. The signature was, in the language of the legal team, dispositive. By Thursday morning, Patricia had delivered the personnel file and the service audit. The audit produced what audits produce when the right people look at the right records with the right questions in mind. There were 3 prior written complaints about Brandy Colton's conduct toward customers, all from the past 14 months, all involving behavior that fell clearly within the conduct standards she had signed. 2 had been addressed with verbal warnings that Derek Paulson had noted in the file but had not escalated. 1 had not been addressed at all. Derek Paulson had known about all 3. The review team finished its work on Friday. That afternoon, Patricia Hale drove back to the Delmar location. She walked into Derek Paulson's office and set a document on his desk that was not unlike the one he had set on Brandy Colton's desk 3 days earlier. It was a termination notice. It cited failure to enforce conduct standards, failure to escalate documented complaints, and failure to intervene in a witnessed violation on the afternoon of Tuesday, October the 14th. Derek looked at the document for a long time. Then he picked up the pen. He had known it was coming. He had known it since the moment he had looked at the organizational chart on the corner booth table and understood, with the specific, nauseating clarity of a man who has grasped the full geometry of his situation, that the decision he had made to go back to his desk was going to define everything that followed. He had made his calculation, and the calculation had been wrong. Not because of who Calvin Reese turned out to be, but because it had been wrong before he knew any of that. It had been wrong the moment he heard a woman mock a customer in his dining room and decided it was not his problem. He signed the form. He took off his manager's lanyard. He set it on the desk. He walked out through the dining room for the last time, past the framed photograph near the entrance, past the corner booth where a man had sat 3 days ago and counted coins and changed everything, and out through the front door into the October afternoon. The door closed behind him with the same soft, certain sound it always made. 2 weeks after that Tuesday afternoon, Cornerstone Kitchen, LLC issued a formal statement through its corporate communications office. The statement announced a company-wide review of customer service standards and complaint escalation procedures across all 14 locations. It announced the creation of a new internal reporting channel. Anonymous, direct to the regional operations level, bypassing individual location management, for customer conduct complaints. It announced mandatory retraining for all customer-facing staff to be completed within 60 days. The statement did not name Brandy Colton. It did not name Derek Paulson. It was written in the careful, impersonal language of institutional policy, the kind of language that says everything and nothing simultaneously. But the people who needed to understand it understood it. And there was one more thing the statement announced: a new position created at the regional level, Customer Experience Liaison, responsible for direct oversight of service standards and staff conduct across the North St. Louis corridor. The position came with a salary, benefits, and a reporting line that went straight to Patricia Hale. The person Calvin Reese recommended for the role was Marcus Webb. Patricia had asked Calvin about it on the phone the week after the audit was complete. She had said, "Is there anyone at the Delmar location you think we should consider for the new position? Anyone who showed good judgment during the incident?" Calvin had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, "There's a young man who busses tables there, Marcus Webb. He's been there 7 months." Another pause. He did the right thing when it was uncomfortable to do it. Find out if he wants to grow. Patricia had found out. Marcus Webb, it turned out, wanted very much to grow. He had been taking community college courses in business administration 2 nights a week, paying for them himself, saying nothing about it to anyone at the Delmar location because he had not yet found a reason to believe it mattered to anyone there. He was wrong about that. It mattered now. When Patricia called him with the offer, Marcus Webb sat down on the edge of his bed and was quiet for long enough that Patricia asked if he was still there. He said, "Yes, ma'am, I'm here." His voice was steady, but his hands, she would have seen if she could have seen them, were not entirely. He accepted the position. He started the following Monday. He never forgot the refilled cup. He never forgot the nod. He carried both of them the way Calvin Reese carried Estelle's Maxim, close, private, worn smooth at the edges from handling, and he brought them into every room he walked into after that. Every conversation he had about how a staff member had spoken to a customer, every moment when it would have been easier to go back to his desk and let it go. He did not let things go. He had learned from a Tuesday afternoon in October that the moments that look small are often the ones that matter most. Calvin Reese drove back to the north side of St. Louis on the Saturday after the corporate statement was issued. He drove himself, as he always did, in the same unremarkable sedan he had driven for 6 years. He parked in front of the 2-bedroom house where he had grown up, where the kitchen had smelled of cornbread and iron dust radiators, where a woman named Estelle had pressed dough at a counter with her face turned slightly away from any camera, as if she had better things to attend to. The house was his now. He had bought it quietly years ago and kept it as it was. The same kitchen, the same back porch, the same garden Estelle had tended with the same methodical patience she had applied to everything else. He came here when he needed to think, and when he needed to remember, and sometimes when he needed neither, and simply wanted to be in a place where the air still held, faintly, the memory of cornbread and a woman who had known exactly what she was building and had never needed anyone else to see it. He sat on the back porch for a long time. The October afternoon was cold and clear. Garden gone to its late season quiet. The last of the season's light moving long and amber across the yard the way it moved across the floor of the Delmar location at this hour. He had his leather notebook open on his knee. He was not writing in it. He was looking at the garden. He thought about a woman with her hands in dough. He thought about a lunch counter with 8 stools. He thought about a man who had heard something from an open office doorway and gone back to his desk. He thought about a young man who had set down a stack of plates and refilled a cup and said 2 words that cost him something and changed the shape of what came next. He thought about what it means to see a person. Not their clothes, not their coins, not the surface of them, but the actual person, the one doing the building, the one carrying the weight, the one who has been in that room before and knows exactly how long it takes for the light to move across the floor. He closed the notebook. He set it on the arm of the chair. He looked at the garden for a while longer. Then he went inside and the door closed behind him with the same soft, certain sound. This is what I want you to sit with before you go. What happened at the Delmar location on a Tuesday afternoon in October was not a story about a powerful man who was wronged and then vindicated. It was not a story about a waitress who made a mistake and paid for it. Those things happened, and they matter, but they are not the story. The story is about what we see when we look at a person, and more precisely, about what we decide not to see. Brandy Colton looked at a man counting coins and saw only what she expected to see. She saw the coins, and the gray Henley, and the clean work boots, and she assembled them into a conclusion that felt, to her, like certainty. She had no idea that certainty was the most dangerous thing she was carrying that afternoon. Not the mockery, not the second comment, the certainty that she already knew what she was looking at. This happens every day. In dining rooms, in lobbies, in parking lots, in offices, in every space where one person has a small amount of power over another and decides, in the fraction of a second it takes to form an assumption, what kind of person they are dealing with. It happens to people who own things and to people who own nothing. It happens to people who have built invisible empires and to people who are simply trying to eat a meal in peace. The coins do not determine the man. The clothes do not determine the man. The only thing that determined Calvin Reese was 20 years of quiet, disciplined, invisible work, and the voice of a woman who pressed dough at a kitchen counter and told him to stay low and build high and let the work speak when he was ready. He was ready. He had been ready for a long time. He had simply been waiting for the moment that required it. The question I want to leave you with is this. How many people do you walk past every day who are carrying something invisible? Something built in silence. Something that would change everything you assumed about them if you could see it? Drop a comment and tell me. I want to hear it. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity does not announce itself, and that the people the world overlooks are often the ones holding it up. Every week on this channel, we find those people and we tell their stories. If that matters to you, stay close. We'll be here.